The crack of a hand meeting flesh echoed through the dusty street of Yosemite, California, and Grace Palmer felt the world tilt sideways before she even registered the pain blooming across her cheek. Her basket of mending tumbled to the ground, spilling carefully folded linens into the dirt as she stumbled backward, her hand flying to her face. Through watering eyes, she saw Silas Drummond looming over her, his face twisted with rage, his meaty fist already rising for another blow. She had only told him she would not marry him, that she could not love a man who drank away his wages and terrorized the saloon girls. Now she would pay for her honesty. But the second blow never landed. A hand shot out from somewhere to her left, fingers wrapping around Drummond's wrist with such force that the bigger man actually grunted in surprise. Grace blinked away tears to see a tall figure in a dusty brown duster coat, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, holding Drummond's arm suspended in midair as easily as if he were restraining a child. "That is enough," the stranger said, his voice low and steady, carrying an edge of steel that made Grace's breath catch despite her fear. Drummond wrenched his arm free, spinning to face the newcomer with a snarl. "This is none of your concern, stranger. The woman needs to learn her place." "Her place is standing upright and unharmed," the cowboy replied, stepping between Grace and Drummond with deliberate calm. Now that he had moved into the afternoon sunlight, Grace could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. A few days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and dust from the trail clung to his clothes, but there was something unmistakably commanding in the way he carried himself. Drummond puffed up his chest, emboldened by the small crowd beginning to gather. "You picked the wrong fight, boy. I asked Grace here to marry me proper-like, and she insulted me in front of half the town. A man has rights. A man has the right to walk away with his teeth still in his head if he is smart," the cowboy said quietly. "You have the right to apologize to the lady and move along. Those are the only rights you have got today." Grace pushed herself to her feet, her legs still shaking. She should say something, should tell them both that she could handle this herself, but her voice seemed to have abandoned her. In the 3 months since she had arrived in Yosemite to keep house for her elderly uncle, she had learned that women in this rough mining town had 2 choices: marry quickly or become invisible. She had been trying very hard to be invisible. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Drummond growled, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. The movement was subtle, but Grace saw the cowboy's stance shift, his weight settling onto the balls of his feet. His hand did not move toward his own weapon, but something in his eyes changed, grew colder and infinitely more dangerous. "My name is Wade Ashford," he said, "and from this moment forward she is under my protection now." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Grace's mouth fell open slightly. Under his protection. They had never even met. She wanted to protest, to assert her independence, but something held her tongue. Maybe it was the genuine concern she heard beneath the cowboy's quiet authority. Maybe it was the way Drummond's face had gone from red to pale at Wade's declaration. Everyone in town knew what it meant when a man claimed a woman was under his protection. It meant that any insult to her was an insult to him. Any harm done to her would be answered for. It was as binding as an engagement in some ways, at least in terms of how the community would view them. And Wade Ashford had just announced it in front of a dozen witnesses. "You cannot just claim someone else's woman," Drummond sputtered, though his hand had moved away from his gun. "I am not your woman," Grace found her voice at last, surprised by how steady it sounded. "I refused your proposal, Mr. Drummond. I made that very clear. You heard the lady, Wade said. Now, you have got about 5 seconds to start apologizing before I lose what little patience I have left. I have been riding for 3 days straight. I have not had a decent meal in longer than that, and I am in no mood for foolishness. Drummond looked between Wade and Grace, his jaw working as he calculated his options. Finally, he spat into the dirt near Grace's feet, which he supposed was the closest he would come to an apology, and stalked off down the street, shoving his way through the dispersing crowd. Grace let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her cheek still throbbed where Drummond had struck her, and she was acutely aware that her hands were trembling. She bent to gather the scattered linens, desperate for something to do with her shaking fingers. Wade crouched down beside her, helping to collect the fallen mending. His hands were large and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living, but they handled the delicate fabrics with surprising gentleness. "Thank you," Grace managed, not quite meeting his eyes. "You did not have to do that. I could have handled him myself." "Could you?" Wade asked, and there was no judgment in his tone, only genuine curiosity. Grace's first instinct was to say yes, to insist on her own capability, but honesty won out. "No," she admitted quietly. "Probably not. Silas Drummond is not known for his restraint when he drinks, and he has been drinking since noon from the smell of him." They stood together, and Wade handed her the basket, now refilled with somewhat dustier linens. Up close, Grace could see the weariness in his face, the way he favored his left side slightly as though nursing a sore rib. His eyes, though, were kind despite their hardness. She had seen plenty of hard men in Yosemite, men made cruel by the harshness of frontier life, but Wade's hardness seemed different, protective rather than predatory. "I am Grace Palmer," she said, extending her hand. "I keep house for my uncle, Thomas Palmer. He runs the general store on the north end of town." Wade took her hand, his grip warm and firm but careful. "Wade Ashford. I just signed on as foreman at the Riverside Ranch about 5 miles west of here. I rode into town to arrange some supplies." The Riverside Ranch. Grace felt a small flutter of relief. At least he was not just passing through. If he had made that declaration about protecting her and then disappeared, the gossip alone would have made her life impossible. "That is Samuel Richardson's place. I heard he was looking for a new foreman after his last one moved to Sacramento." "That would be me now," Wade confirmed. He hesitated, then said, "Miss Palmer, about what I said back there. I apologize if I overstepped. I just knew Drummond would not back down unless someone made it clear he was going to have to go through me to get to you. Men like that only understand strength." "I understand," Grace said, and she did. She had seen enough of frontier justice to know that sometimes survival meant accepting protection, even from strangers. "But you realize what you have done, do you not? The whole town will assume we are courting now at the very least." A faint smile touched Wade's lips, the first break in his serious demeanor. "Would that be so terrible? I promise I am better company than Drummond, though I will admit that is a low bar to clear." Despite everything, Grace felt herself smile back. "I suppose I should be grateful. Silas has been persistent for weeks. Maybe now he will finally leave me alone." She touched her cheek gingerly, feeling the heat of the bruise forming there. Wade's expression darkened. "You should have someone look at that. You have a doctor in town, Doctor Morrison, but he is expensive and it is just a bruise. I have had worse." She said it without thinking, then realized what she had revealed. Wade's eyes sharpened with concern. "Has Drummond bothered you before?" "No, not like that," Grace said quickly. "I meant from general clumsiness and frontier life. This is not exactly a gentle place for women." She could see him weighing whether to believe her, but finally he nodded. Will you allow me to at least walk you home? I gave my word you were under my protection, and I would like to see that you get there safely. Grace knew she should refuse, should maintain some semblance of propriety, but the truth was her legs still felt unsteady, and the thought of walking home alone, worrying that Drummond might be waiting around some corner, made her stomach twist with anxiety. I would appreciate that, Mr. Ashford. Wade, he corrected gently. If the town is going to be talking about us anyway, we might as well use first names. Grace, she replied, and felt something shift in the air between them, something that made her heartbeat quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. They walked through Yosemite's dusty streets side by side, not touching but close enough that Grace could feel the solid presence of him beside her. It was late afternoon in the spring of 1883, and the town was busy with miners coming off their shifts, prospectors arguing over claims, and merchants closing up their shops for the evening. Yosemite was not like the established towns back east where Grace had grown up. It was raw and rough, thrown together by people chasing gold and silver and dreams of wealth. But it was also beautiful in its own way, nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada with pine-covered slopes rising on all sides and the Merced River running cold and clear just beyond the town limits. "How long have you been in California?" Wade asked as they navigated around a broken wagon wheel lying in the middle of the street. 3 months, Grace said. I came from Ohio to help my uncle after he broke his leg. He never married, and he needed someone to manage the household and help in the store while he recovered. I thought I would stay a few weeks, but I am still here. Do you plan to go back east? Grace considered the question. A few months ago, the answer would have been an immediate yes. But now, despite the roughness and the danger and men like Silas Drummond, she found herself hesitating. I do not know. My uncle has asked me to stay permanently. He wants to leave me the store when he passes, which could give me real security. But I will not lie, some days I miss civilization terribly. I can understand that, Wade said. Though I am not much of a city person myself, I grew up on a ranch in Colorado. My father raised cattle until he died 5 years back. My mother followed him a year later. The land went to my older brother, which was right and proper as he was the firstborn. I have been working as a ranch hand and foreman ever since, moving from place to place. There was something in his voice when he spoke of his family, a quiet sadness that Grace recognized. She knew what it was to lose people you loved. Her own parents had died in a typhoid outbreak when she was 16, leaving her to be raised by a stern aunt, who had made it clear that Grace was more burden than blessing. They reached the general store, a sturdy wooden building with a neat sign reading Palmer's General Goods hanging above the door. Attached to the back was the small house where Grace lived with her uncle, accessible through a door behind the main counter. This is me, Grace said, stopping at the front entrance. Through the window, she could see her Uncle Thomas behind the counter, his broken leg propped on a stool as he tallied the day's receipts. He looked up, and his bushy white eyebrows rose in surprise when he spotted Wade. Your uncle looks like he is recovering well, Wade observed. He is stubborn as a mule, which helps, Grace said fondly. He was up and hobbling around on crutches within a week against doctor's orders. An awkward silence fell between them. Grace knew she should thank Wade again and go inside, but she found herself reluctant to end the conversation. There was something comfortable about talking to him, despite the dramatic circumstances of their meeting. Grace, Wade said slowly, as if weighing each word. I meant what I said back there. About the protection. I know we just met and you have no reason to trust me, but if Drummond or anyone else bothers you, I want you to send word to the Riverside Ranch. I will come right away. Grace felt unexpected warmth bloom in her chest. When was the last time anyone had offered to help her without wanting something in return? Why would you do that for a stranger? Wade met her eyes steadily. My father raised me to believe that a man's worth is measured by how he treats people who cannot defend themselves. I have seen too many men abuse their strength and call it their right. I will not stand by and watch that happen if I can prevent it. You are a good man, Wade Ashford, Grace said softly. I try to be. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell. I should let you get inside. But I will be in town again in a few days for supplies. Maybe I will stop by and make sure you are doing all right. I would like that, Grace admitted, surprising herself with how much she meant it. She watched him walk back down the street toward the livery where he must have stabled his horse, his tall figure cutting a striking silhouette in the fading sunlight. Only when he had disappeared around a corner did she finally turn and enter the store. Uncle Thomas looked up from his ledger, his keen blue eyes taking in her flushed face and the darkening bruise on her cheek. What happened to you, girl? And who was that tall drink of water escorting you home? Grace set her basket down and quickly related the afternoon's events, watching her uncle's face cycle through alarm, anger, and finally grudging approval. Silas Drummond struck you. Thomas's voice was dangerously quiet. That yellow-bellied coward. If I could get up from this chair without toppling over, I would march down to the saloon and give him a piece of my mind. Please do not, Grace said quickly. It is handled. Wade made sure of that. Wade, is it? Thomas's eyes twinkled with sudden mischief. On a first-name basis already with the man who just declared you were under his protection. That is fast work, even for Yosemite. Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. It is not like that, Uncle. He was just being kind. Kind, my foot, Thomas snorted. I have seen plenty of men be kind to women, Grace. That boy staking a public claim on you, that is something else entirely. Mark my words, this town will have you married off by Sunday in their minds. Well, their minds can think what they please, Grace said, perhaps more sharply than she intended. I am not looking for a husband. I came here to help you, not to get tangled up with some cowboy I just met. Even as she said it, though, she could not quite forget the warmth of Wade's hand when he had helped her gather the linens, or the protective fury in his eyes when he had seen her bruised cheek. She had spent 3 months in Yosemite deflecting the attention of miners and ranch hands, keeping herself apart and untouchable. One afternoon with Wade Ashford, and those careful walls felt dangerously close to crumbling. Thomas studied her face with the shrewd perception that came from 70 years of reading people. All right, girl, I will not tease, but for what it is worth, Samuel Richardson is a good judge of character, and he would not hire a foreman who was not trustworthy. If that young man says he will protect you, I believe he means it. I believe he does too, Grace admitted quietly. That is what worries me. She spent the rest of the evening helping her uncle close up the store and preparing their modest dinner, but her mind kept drifting back to Wade. Who was he really? A drifter looking for temporary work, or someone who might actually put down roots in Yosemite? And why did she care so much about the answer? That night, she lay in her small bedroom under the eaves, listening to the sounds of the town settling into its evening rhythms. Somewhere down the street, a piano played in the saloon. Dogs barked. Men's voices rose and fell in argument or laughter. The wild sounds of a wild place. Grace touched her bruised cheek gently, remembering the moment Wade's hand had caught Drummond's wrist, the absolute certainty in his voice when he had said she was under his protection now. She had come to California seeking temporary refuge, and instead found herself caught up in something she did not fully understand, something that frightened and excited her in equal measure. She fell asleep, thinking of whiskey-colored eyes and calloused hands gentle on delicate fabric, and dreamed of wide open spaces and someone to share them with. 3 days passed before Grace saw Wade again. 3 days in which the story of the confrontation spread through Yosemite like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. By some accounts, Wade had single-handedly faced down Drummond and 6 of his friends. Other versions claimed Grace and Wade had been secretly engaged for months. Grace ignored the gossip as best she could, focusing on her work in the store and caring for her uncle. Silas Drummond had made himself scarce, which Grace counted as a blessing. She had heard from the baker's wife that he had been complaining loudly in the saloon about uppity women and interfering strangers, but he had not tried to approach her again. Whether that was due to Wade's warning or simple embarrassment, Grace neither knew nor cared. On the 4th day, Grace was restocking shelves in the general store when the bell above the door chimed. She turned, expecting to see one of their regular customers, and instead found Wade standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somehow both confident and uncertain at the same time. "Good afternoon," he said, his eyes immediately finding the fading bruise on her cheek. Some of the tension left his shoulders when he saw it was healing. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all," Grace said, very aware that her uncle had suddenly developed an intense interest in their conversation, pretending to organize the counter while obviously eavesdropping. "Did you need supplies?" "We have most things, though I am afraid we are low on coffee beans until the next shipment arrives." "Actually, I was hoping I might speak with you," Wade said. "If you have a moment, it is about the other day." Grace glanced at her uncle, who made a shooing motion with his hand. "Go on, girl." "I can mind the store for a bit. Not like I am going anywhere with this leg." Feeling self-conscious, Grace untied her apron and followed Wade outside. The afternoon was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains. Wade led her a short distance from the store, to a spot where they could talk without being overheard by every busybody in town. "I have been thinking about what happened," Wade began, turning his hat over in his hands in a gesture that Grace was beginning to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "About what I said. I want to make sure you understand that I meant it, but I also do not want you to feel obligated to me in any way. If my declaration has made your life more difficult, I apologize." Grace studied his face, seeing genuine concern there. "Actually, it has made things easier," she admitted. "Silas has been avoiding me, and several other men who were getting too friendly have backed off as well. Apparently, your protection carries weight in this town." Wade's expression relaxed slightly. "Samuel Richardson has a good reputation, and the Riverside Ranch is important to the local economy. I suppose that gives me some standing by association." "It is more than that," Grace said. "I have asked around about you. People say you are fair, that you work harder than any 2 men, and that you do not tolerate cheating or cruelty from the ranch hands. That kind of character earns respect." A faint flush colored Wade's cheeks. "You have been asking about me." "Of course I have," Grace said frankly. "A stranger declares himself my protector. I would be foolish not to find out what kind of man he is." "And what did you decide?" Grace smiled. "That I could have done far worse." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching a freight wagon rumble past. Finally, Wade cleared his throat. "Miss Palmer, Grace, I wonder if you might allow me to call on you properly. I know the circumstances of our meeting were unusual, but I find myself wanting to know you better. And I think, maybe, the town gossips might do less damage if we give them something real to talk about instead of making up stories." Grace's heart fluttered in a way that she told herself was simply surprise, though she knew it was more than that. "Are you suggesting we court Mr. Ashford. I am suggesting we see if we might enjoy each other's company, Wade said carefully. With no obligations or promises beyond that. If you find me poor company, you have every right to send me on my way. But I would like the chance to try. It was perhaps the most honest proposal for courtship Grace had ever heard. No flowery declarations, no promises of eternal devotion from a man who barely knew her. Just a simple request for the opportunity to see what might develop between them. She found that honesty deeply appealing. I would like that, Grace said. Though I should warn you, my uncle is very protective and probably will interrogate you thoroughly. Wade's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his serious features into something warm and almost boyish. I think I can handle a protective uncle. I have faced down ornery bulls and half-wild horses. How much worse can a shopkeeper be? Grace laughed. You clearly have not met Uncle Thomas. He is a lamb with most people, but let him think someone might hurt me, and he turns into a grizzly bear. Then I will make sure to convince him my intentions are honorable, Wade said. Which they are, by the way. I want to be very clear about that. I believe you, Grace said, and realized she meant it completely. There was something fundamentally decent about Wade Ashford, something that made her trust him in a way she had not trusted anyone since her parents died. They made plans for Wade to join Grace and her uncle for Sunday dinner, a properly respectable way to begin a courtship in a town where impropriety could ruin a woman's reputation overnight. Wade would come to the early service at the small church on the hill, then walk home with them afterward for the meal. The whole town would see them together, which would solidify his claim of protection and hopefully end any remaining speculation about the nature of their relationship. As Wade prepared to leave, he hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. I brought you something. It is not much, but I thought you might like it. Curious, Grace unwrapped the paper to reveal a book. Not a new book, but one that had been well cared for, its cover worn smooth from many readings. She opened it to the title page and read, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I noticed you had ink stains on your fingers the other day, Wade said, sounding almost embarrassed. I thought maybe you liked to read and write. This was my mother's favorite book. She read it so many times the pages practically fell apart, so I bought a new copy for her one Christmas. She passed before the binding even got broken in properly. I have carried it with me since then, but I think she would like knowing it went to someone who would appreciate it. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. It was such a thoughtful gift, so personal and meaningful, and the fact that he had noticed such a small detail about her spoke volumes about his attentiveness. Wade, I cannot take your mother's book. Please, he said softly. It would make me happy knowing you had it. Besides, you can loan it back to me when you are done. That gives me an excuse to keep visiting. As if you needed an excuse, Grace said, but she clutched the book gently, already treasuring it. Thank you. This is the kindest gift anyone has given me in a very long time. Wade's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the bustling street around them seemed to fade away. Grace felt her breath catch at the intensity of his gaze, at the way something seemed to arc between them like heat lightning on a summer night. I should get back, Wade said finally, his voice slightly rough. I have a long ride ahead and I want to get back before dark. Ride safely, Grace said. And Wade, I am looking forward to Sunday. So am I, he replied, and the warmth in his voice stayed with Grace long after he had ridden out of town. Sunday dawned bright and clear, and Grace found herself taking extra care with her appearance. She wore her best dress, a modest blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her dark hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Uncle Thomas noticed her primping and grinned, but had the wisdom not to comment beyond offering to let her use his good shawl if the morning was cool. The church service was held in a small whitewashed building that served double duty as a schoolhouse during the week. Grace and her uncle arrived early, as was their habit, and Grace tried not to watch the door too obviously. But when Wade walked in just as the first hymn began, wearing clean clothes and with his hair neatly combed, her heart gave a definite leap. He spotted her immediately and made his way to their pew, settling beside her with a quiet greeting to Uncle Thomas. Throughout the service, Grace was hyper-aware of his presence, of the way their shoulders almost but not quite touched when they shared a hymnal, of the deep resonance of his voice when he joined in the singing. After the service, they walked back to the store together, and Grace was acutely conscious of the stares and whispers that followed them. Let them talk, she thought. For once, they would at least be talking about something true. Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Grace had prepared fried chicken with mashed potatoes and greens from the garden she kept behind the store, with apple pie for dessert. Uncle Thomas, true to Grace's warning, interrogated Wade thoroughly about his background, his intentions, and his prospects. But he did it with enough humor that it never became uncomfortable, and Wade answered each question with patient honesty. "My father taught me that a man who has nothing to hide should have no trouble speaking plainly," Wade said when Thomas asked about his family. "I have no fortune to offer, but I am a hard worker and I save my wages carefully. Samuel Richardson has said if I prove myself this year, he will make me a partner in the ranch, which would give me real stability for the first time since my father died." "Partnership in the Riverside Ranch is nothing to sneeze at," Thomas acknowledged. "Samuel is getting on in years and he has no children. He needs someone reliable to eventually take over." "That is what I am hoping," Wade said. "I have spent years working other men's land. I would like something of my own." Grace listened to them talk, serving food and clearing plates, and found herself imagining what a life with Wade might look like. A ranch of their own, perhaps with children running through the yard, a home built on partnership and respect rather than just obligation. It was a startling thought, particularly given how recently they had met, but not an unwelcome one. After dinner, Uncle Thomas conveniently remembered urgent paperwork that needed his attention in the store, leaving Grace and Wade alone in the small parlor. It was not entirely proper, but the door to the store was open and Thomas was just on the other side, so Grace supposed it was acceptable by frontier standards. "Your uncle is a good man," Wade said, settling into one of the worn armchairs. "He is the best of men," Grace agreed. "He took me in when I had nowhere else to go, and he has never made me feel like a burden." "Is that how you felt before? Like a burden?" Grace hesitated, then decided Wade had been honest with her, so she owed him the same. "After my parents died, I lived with my father's sister. Aunt Margaret was a difficult woman. She believed in duty and sacrifice, particularly from those she considered beneath her station. She never let me forget that she was feeding and housing me out of Christian obligation rather than love. When Uncle Thomas wrote asking for help, I jumped at the chance to leave." "I am sorry," Wade said quietly. "No child should feel unwanted." "I survived," Grace said, surprised by how much better it felt to say the words out loud. "And it taught me to value the people who genuinely care, like Uncle Thomas. And now, perhaps, like you." Wade leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes serious. "Grace, I want to be very clear about something. I know we have only just met and I am not expecting anything from you. But I need you to know that when I said you were under my protection, it was not just words. I meant it with everything in me. You do not have to care for me romantically or even like me very much, but you can count on me to keep you safe." That is a promise." Grace felt something tight in her chest loosen, something she had not even realized was knotted there. "I think I am starting to like you quite a bit, Wade Ashford, and that terrifies me." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I am not good at trusting people," Grace admitted. "I learned young that the people who are supposed to care for you can make you feel small and worthless. I have spent years building walls to protect myself, and here you come, and suddenly I want to let those walls down. That is frightening." Wade stood and crossed to where she sat on the settee. He knelt down so they were at eye level and gently took her hand in his. "I cannot promise I will never hurt you. I am human and I will make mistakes. But I can promise that I will never deliberately make you feel small or worthless. You deserve better than that. Every person does." Grace looked into his eyes and saw absolute sincerity there. Slowly, she reached out with her free hand and touched his face, feeling the scratch of stubble against her palm. "How are you real?" she whispered. "I ask myself the same thing about you," Wade said. "I came to Yosemite just looking for work and a place to maybe settle down eventually. I never expected to find someone like you." They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Uncle Thomas cleared his throat loudly from the other room, and they broke apart, both smiling at the obvious signal that they had been alone long enough. Wade stayed another hour, talking with Thomas about the politics of water rights and mining claims, topics that would bore most people, but that seemed to engage both men thoroughly. Grace worked on her mending and listened, enjoying the sound of Wade's voice, the thoughtful way he considered problems, the respect he showed her uncle's opinions. When the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Wade finally took his leave. Grace walked him to the door of the store, very aware that several townspeople were finding excuses to pass by at just that moment, eager to observe the courting couple. "May I call on you again?" Wade asked. "I could come to town next Saturday if that would suit you." "I would like that very much," Grace said. "Perhaps we could take a walk by the river. It is beautiful this time of year." "That sounds perfect." Wade hesitated, then lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that Grace felt her heart melt a little. "Until Saturday, then." "Until Saturday," Grace echoed. She watched him mount his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and ride out of town. Only when he had disappeared from view did she turn back inside, where Uncle Thomas was waiting with a knowing smile. "Do not say a word," Grace warned him, but she was smiling too. "Would not dream of it," Thomas said innocently. "Except to say that if you do not marry that boy, you are a fool." "Uncle Thomas, just stating facts, girl, just stating facts." The week that followed passed with agonizing slowness. Grace tried to keep herself busy with the usual tasks of running the household and helping in the store, but her mind kept drifting to Saturday and the promised walk by the river. She caught herself reading passages of Pride and Prejudice multiple times without absorbing a word, too busy thinking about the man who had given her the book. On Wednesday, a young boy from the Riverside Ranch rode into town with a message. Wade wanted to let Grace know that he might be a few hours later than planned on Saturday due to a problem with one of the pasture fences that needed immediate repair. The note was brief and businesslike, but Wade had signed it "Yours" in anticipation, which made Grace's stomach flutter foolishly. She sent a reply saying that was perfectly fine, and that she hoped the repair work went smoothly. She did not sign it "Yours" in return, but she did add "with warm regards," which felt like a small but significant step forward in declaring her feelings. Friday afternoon brought unexpected drama. Grace was sweeping the front steps of the store when she heard angry shouting from down the street. She looked up to see Silas Drummond staggering out of the saloon, clearly drunk despite the early hour. Two other men were with him, both looking mean and restless in the way of men seeking trouble. Grace's first instinct was to slip inside and lock the door, but she was too slow. Drummond spotted her and pointed, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. There she is, the woman who thinks she is too good for honest work. Grace's hands tightened on the broom handle. Uncle Thomas was in the back room, sorting inventory, and she did not want to bring danger to him if she could avoid it. "Go home, Silas. You are drunk." "I am drunk. So what?" Drummond took a step toward her, then another. "You think because some cowboy spoke up for you once that makes you special. He is probably already tired of you. Men get tired of uppity women quick enough. You need to leave," Grace said firmly, proud that her voice did not shake. "Wade will hear about this." "Wade is not here," one of Drummond's companions said with a nasty laugh. "Seems like your protector is not much good if he is not around to protect you." They were only a few feet away now, and Grace could smell the whiskey on their breath. Her mind raced, trying to calculate her options. She could scream for help, but the nearest people were in the saloon, and most of them would not intervene in what they would see as a dispute between a woman and her rejected suitor. She could run inside, but they might follow, and then Uncle Thomas would be in danger too. Before she could decide, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. "That is far enough." Grace's head whipped around to see Wade striding up the street, his face like thunderclouds before a storm. He must have just ridden into town, as dust still clung to his clothes and his horse was tied at the hitching post near the store, sides still heaving from a hard ride. Well, Drummond slurred, turning to face Wade with exaggerated bravado. "If it is not the hero." "Come to save your woman again." "I came to get supplies," Wade said evenly, moving to stand between Grace and the three men. "But if I need to make another point about harassment, I am happy to oblige." 3 against 1, Drummond's friend pointed out. "Not sure those odds favor you, Cowboy." Wade's expression did not change. "I have faced worse odds than 3 drunks who cannot stand up straight, but I am going to give you the same chance I gave Drummond last time. Walk away now and we will all forget this happened. Push it, and you are going to regret it." For a moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Grace held her breath, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Then a new voice joined the fray. "Is there a problem here?" Sheriff James Hawkins, a grizzled veteran with a no-nonsense attitude, stepped out of the telegraph office across the street. His hand rested casually on the gun at his hip, but there was nothing casual about the steel in his eyes. Drummond and his friends suddenly looked far less confident. "No problem, Sheriff," Drummond mumbled. "Just having a conversation." "That is what I thought," Hawkins said. "And I think that conversation is over now. You 3 get on home and sleep it off. And Drummond, if I hear about you bothering Miss Palmer again, I will personally escort you to the town limits and suggest you not come back. Do we have an understanding?" "Yes, Sheriff," Drummond muttered, and he and his companions slunk away like whipped dogs. Hawkins tipped his hat to Grace. "Miss Palmer, Ashford." He looked at Wade with something like approval. "Good to see someone in this town who stands up for what is right. Keep it up." "Thank you, Sheriff," Wade said, and Hawkins ambled away. As soon as they were alone, Wade turned to Grace, his hands hovering as if he wanted to touch her but was not sure if he should. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I am fine," Grace assured him, though now that the danger had passed, she felt decidedly shaky. "You got here just in time." "I was starting to wonder what I was going to do." "I am sorry I was not here sooner," Wade said, and he looked genuinely angry with himself. "I should have anticipated that Drummond might try something while I was out at the ranch." "You cannot be everywhere," Grace pointed out. "Though I am very glad you were here when it mattered." Uncle Thomas burst out of the store, moving faster than Grace had seen since his injury. "Grace, are you hurt? I just heard shouting and then I saw Drummond and his worthless friends leaving." "I am fine, Uncle. Wade and the sheriff handled it." Thomas looked at Wade with new respect. "Seems I owe you another debt, young man." "No debt," Wade said quietly. "Just doing what any decent person would do." Thomas studied Wade for a long moment, then nodded. "Come inside, both of you. Grace, put on coffee. I think we all could use something to steady our nerves." Over coffee and some of Grace's oatmeal cookies, they discussed what to do about Drummond. Sheriff Hawkins had made his warning clear, but they all knew that drunk men were unpredictable, and Drummond had shown himself willing to get physical. "I could talk to Samuel Richardson," Wade suggested. "The Riverside Ranch employs half the men in this town, directly or indirectly. If Samuel lets it be known that anyone harassing you will find themselves out of work, that will carry weight." "I hate to cause that much trouble," Grace said, but Uncle Thomas shook his head. "Better to cause trouble now than deal with worse later. Drummond is a mean drunk, and he has friends who are just as bad. If they think they can get away with scaring you, they will keep trying." It was decided that Wade would speak to his employer, and Uncle Thomas would have a word with Sheriff Hawkins about keeping a closer eye on Drummond and his associates. Grace felt both protected and slightly helpless, which was an uncomfortable combination. She was grateful for their concern, but part of her chafed at needing that protection in the first place. "I know this frustrates you," Wade said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. They had moved to the store front while Thomas finished his coffee in the back. "You wish you did not need protecting. Is it that obvious, only to someone paying attention?" Wade leaned against the counter, his eyes thoughtful. "For what it is worth, I do not see you as weak. Standing your ground against 3 drunk men takes courage, even if you could not have fought them off physically. You did not run or hide or back down. That is strength." Grace felt some of her frustration ease. "Thank you for that, and for coming when you did. How did you happen to be in town today anyway? I thought you were not coming until tomorrow." "I finished the fence work earlier than expected," Wade admitted, "and I was impatient to see you. I told myself I needed to order supplies, but the truth is, I just wanted an excuse to come to town a day early." The honesty of the statement made Grace smile despite everything that had just happened. "I am glad you did. Though that probably means you will be tired tomorrow when we were supposed to go walking." "Not a chance," Wade said. "I have been thinking about that walk all week. A little lost sleep is not going to stop me." They shared a smile, and Grace felt the fear and tension of the past hour begin to fade, replaced by something warmer and far more pleasant. True to his word, Wade arrived at the store shortly after noon the next day, looking well rested and eager. The afternoon was perfect for a walk, warm but not hot, with a light breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers from the meadows outside town. Grace had packed a small basket with bread, cheese, and some early strawberries, thinking they might find a nice spot to sit by the river. She wore a simple dress in pale green, practical enough for walking but pretty enough that she felt feminine and attractive. Uncle Thomas waved them off with a knowing smile and strict instructions to be back before dark. "Remember, Grace, you are being courted by a gentleman. I expect him to behave like one." "Yes, Uncle Thomas," Grace said patiently, while Wade looked appropriately serious and promised to be a perfect gentleman. They walked through town and out toward the Merced River, which ran swift and clear at this time of year, fed by snowmelt from the high mountains. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they approached, and soon they were walking along a well-worn path that followed the riverbank. "It is beautiful here," Wade said, looking around at the pine trees and the mountains rising in the distance. "I grew up with mountains, but these are more dramatic than the ones in Colorado, more wild." "Everything about California feels wild," Grace said. "Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a frightening way. Back in Ohio, everything was so settled and orderly. Here, you feel like civilization is just a thin veneer over something much rawer." "Does that appeal to you? The wildness?" Grace considered the question. "I think it does, actually. I spent so many years living by everyone else's rules, trying to be what my aunt wanted me to be. Here, there is more freedom to be myself, even if that freedom comes with danger." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following the river upstream. Eventually, they came to a spot where the bank widened into a small meadow dotted with wildflowers. A large flat rock jutted out over the water, perfect for sitting and watching the river flow past. "This looks ideal," Grace said, and Wade helped her spread a small blanket she had brought. They sat side by side on the rock, close enough that their shoulders brushed, and Grace unpacked the food. "This is nice," Wade said, accepting a piece of bread and cheese. "I cannot remember the last time I just sat and enjoyed an afternoon like this." "Ranch work does not leave much time for leisure. Tell me about the Riverside Ranch," Grace said. "What is it like?" Wade's face lit up with enthusiasm as he described the property. The ranch encompassed several thousand acres of grazing land, with a main house, bunkhouse, barns, and all the infrastructure needed for a successful cattle operation. Samuel Richardson had built it from nothing 30 years ago, and it now supplied beef to mining camps and towns throughout the region. "Samuel is tough but fair," Wade said. "He expects hard work, but he pays well and treats his men with respect. That is why he has such a good crew. Men will put up with a lot if they feel valued. And he wants to make you a partner. If I prove myself this year, yes. He has no family to leave the ranch to, and he is getting too old to manage everything himself. He needs someone who can eventually take over the operation, and he seems to think I am that person." Wade paused, then added quietly, "It would be everything I have worked toward since my father died, a place of my own, real stability, a future." "That sounds wonderful," Grace said, and meant it. "You deserve that, Wade. Anyone who works as hard as you do deserves to see the rewards of that labor." "What about you?" Wade asked. "What do you want for your future?" It was a question no one had ever really asked Grace before. Her aunt had told her what she should want. A respectable marriage to a boring but stable man, a house full of children, quiet obedience, and a life lived in the shadows of other people's ambitions. But what did Grace herself actually want? "I want to matter," she said slowly, working out the words as she spoke. "I want to do work that means something, to be with people who value me for who I am rather than what I can do for them. I want to wake up in the morning and feel excited about the day ahead instead of just enduring it." She laughed self-consciously. "That probably sounds silly." "It does not sound silly at all," Wade said seriously. "It sounds like the most reasonable thing in the world." They ate in comfortable silence, watching the river flow past. Grace found herself acutely aware of Wade's presence, of the solid warmth of him beside her, of the way the afternoon sunlight brought out bronze highlights in his hair. When had she started noticing such things? When had this man become so important to her? "Grace," Wade said suddenly, "I need to tell you something about why I reacted so strongly when I saw Drummond about to hit you that first day." Grace turned to look at him, hearing something heavy in his voice. "When I was growing up," Wade continued, "my best friend was a boy named Marcus. His father was a ranch hand on our property, and Marcus and I were inseparable from the time we were small. But Marcus's father was a mean drunk. He would come home after getting paid and drinking at the saloon, and he would beat Marcus's mother. Sometimes Marcus too, if the boy tried to intervene. Wade's hands clenched into fists, and Grace instinctively reached out to cover them with her own. "My father tried to help," Wade went on. "He offered Marcus's mother a place to stay, offered to involve the law, but she was afraid. She thought her husband would kill her if she left. So she stayed, and the beatings continued. Then one night when Marcus was 14, his father came home worse than usual. There was a fight, and Marcus tried to protect his mother. His father knocked him down so hard Marcus hit his head on the corner of the fireplace. Grace's breath caught. "Oh, Wade." "Marcus died 3 days later," Wade said, his voice rough with old pain. "His mother finally left after that, moved back east to live with family, but Marcus was gone and nothing could change that. My father fired Marcus's father and made sure everyone in the county knew what he had done, but that did not bring Marcus back." "I am so sorry," Grace said softly. "I swore to myself that day that I would never stand by and let someone hurt another person if I had the power to stop it," Wade said. "So when I saw Drummond about to hit you, I did not even think. I just reacted, because I could not save Marcus, but maybe I could save you." Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. She understood now why Wade had been so fierce in his protection, why he had taken such a strong stand. It was not about possessiveness or control. It was about preventing the kind of tragedy that had scarred his childhood. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "And thank you for saving me. You did the right thing, Wade. You are a good man." Wade turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made Grace's breath quicken. "You make me want to be even better," he said quietly. "When I am with you, I feel like I could be the man I have always wanted to be." They were very close now, close enough that Grace could see the flecks of gold in Wade's eyes, could feel his breath warm on her face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Wade leaned in. Grace's eyes fluttered closed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The kiss was gentle, tentative, as if Wade was afraid she might break. His lips were soft against hers, tasting faintly of strawberries. Grace's hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heartbeat beneath her palm. When they finally drew apart, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the moment I met you," he admitted. "I have been wanting you to," Grace confessed, and felt him smile. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the river, talking about everything and nothing. Wade told her about growing up on a ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his mother's love of books and his father's quiet wisdom. Grace told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and how much she still missed them, about the years with her aunt, and how they had shaped her into someone both stronger and more cautious about trusting others. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they reluctantly packed up their things and began the walk back to town. Wade took Grace's hand as they walked, his fingers intertwined with hers, and Grace felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a warm cloak. "I do not want this day to end," Wade said as they approached the general store. "Neither do I," Grace admitted, "but there will be other days." "Many of them, I hope." Wade stopped just outside the store, pulling Grace gently around to face him. "Grace, I know we have only known each other a short time. I know it is probably too soon to say this, but I need you to know. What I feel for you, it is not just passing fancy. You matter to me. You matter more than anyone has in a very long time." Grace reached up to cup his face, feeling the late-day stubble rough against her palm. "You matter to me too, Wade, more than I thought possible in such a short time." They kissed again, longer this time with more confidence and less hesitation. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "I will be back next Saturday," Wade promised, "and probably a few times during the week if I can find excuses to come to town." "You do not need excuses," Grace said. "Just come." She watched him ride away into the gathering dusk, her heart full in a way it had never been before. Uncle Thomas was waiting inside with 1,000 questions, but Grace did not mind. She had a lifetime of answers to give. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Wade became a regular presence in Yosemite, riding into town whenever his duties at the ranch allowed. Sometimes he came for supplies, sometimes just for a brief visit with Grace. They walked by the river, shared meals with Uncle Thomas, and slowly built a foundation of trust and affection that grew stronger with each passing day. The town, seeing their obvious devotion to each other, gradually stopped gossiping and started planning. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house began dropping hints about wedding venues. The minister asked Wade if he might be needing his services soon. Even Samuel Richardson, the few times Grace met him when she visited the ranch, made pointed comments about Wade needing a good woman to help him manage things when he became a partner. But despite the external pressure, Wade and Grace took their time. Both had known too much loss and disappointment to rush into something as important as marriage. They needed to be sure, not just that they cared for each other, but that they could build a life together. "My aunt used to say that love was not enough for a successful marriage," Grace told Wade one evening as they sat on the porch behind the store, watching the stars come out. "She said you needed shared values and compatible temperaments and practical planning." She was probably right, Wade said, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "Love alone cannot put food on the table or keep a roof over your head, but without love, all the practicality in the world seems kind of empty." "We have both, though, I think," Grace said. "We want similar things. We respect each other. We work well together. And I love you, Wade Ashford. I think I have loved you since the moment you stepped between me and Silas Drummond, but I know I love you now." Wade went very still. Then he turned to face her, his eyes bright in the starlight. "Say that again." "I love you," Grace repeated, meeting his gaze steadily. "Completely and without reservation. I love you." "Grace Palmer," Wade said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have been in love with you since the day I saw you gather up those spilled linens with such dignity, despite being hurt and frightened. You are the bravest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They kissed under the stars, and it felt like a promise, like the beginning of forever. The next day, Wade asked Uncle Thomas for permission to marry Grace. Thomas, who had been expecting this for weeks, gave his blessing gladly and immediately started making plans for the wedding. Grace and Wade, caught up in the whirlwind of well-meaning interference from half the town, decided to embrace it. They would marry in 6 weeks, at the end of summer, giving them time to make proper preparations. Those 6 weeks were some of the happiest of Grace's life. She sewed her wedding dress with help from the other women in town. A simple but elegant gown in cream-colored silk that Uncle Thomas insisted on buying as his gift to her. Wade worked long hours at the ranch, preparing for his upcoming partnership with Samuel Richardson, and saving every penny to furnish the small house on the property that would become their home. Grace visited the ranch several times with Uncle Thomas, and each time she fell more in love with it. The house Wade would share with her was modest but well-built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor. It had a wide porch that looked out over the grazing lands, and Grace could already imagine sitting there in the evenings with Wade, watching the sun set over the mountains. "We can add on as we need to," Wade said, showing her around. "If we have children, we will need more bedrooms. And I thought maybe you would like a real study, a place where you could keep your books and have space to yourself." The thoughtfulness of that gesture moved Grace deeply. "You have thought of everything. I want you to be happy here," Wade said simply. "This is going to be your home as much as mine. More, maybe, since I will be out working most days and you will be the one making it a real home." The wedding took place on a perfect August morning in 1883, with the whole town in attendance. Grace walked down the aisle of the little church on Uncle Thomas's arm, wearing her beautiful dress and carrying wildflowers that Wade had picked for her that morning. When she reached the altar and saw Wade waiting for her, his eyes bright with love and promise, she knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. They exchanged vows in voices that rang clear and sure. Wade promised to love and honor and protect Grace all the days of his life. Grace promised to love and support and stand beside Wade through whatever challenges they might face. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation were seen wiping away tears. The reception was held at the ranch, with Samuel Richardson insisting on hosting. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by half the women in Yosemite. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Grace felt surrounded by genuine warmth and affection in a way she had not experienced since her parents died. Late in the afternoon, as the celebration began to wind down, Wade took Grace's hand and led her away from the crowd, toward the small house that was now theirs. They walked slowly, savoring the moment, and when they reached the porch, Wade scooped Grace up in his arms, making her laugh with delight. "I am carrying you over the threshold properly," he announced, and proceeded to do exactly that, setting her down gently once they were inside. The house had been transformed. Furniture Wade had ordered weeks ago filled the rooms, simple but sturdy. Curtains hung at the windows, and someone, probably Samuel, had filled vases with flowers. It felt warm and welcoming, like a real home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashford," Wade said softly, pulling Grace into his arms. "It feels right," Grace said, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Being here with you, it feels like where I was always meant to be." That night, they began their life together in earnest. Wade was gentle and patient, understanding that while Grace loved him deeply, this was still new and somewhat frightening territory for her. They took their time, learning each other, and when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting into place. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Grace traced patterns on Wade's chest and marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had come to California expecting temporary refuge and instead found a home, a purpose, and a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, his fingers combing through her hair. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," Grace said honestly. "And that I am so grateful Silas Drummond was horrible to me that day, because it brought you into my life." Wade laughed softly. "That is a strange thing to be grateful for, but I understand what you mean. Sometimes good things come from bad circumstances." "Do you think we will always be this happy?" Grace asked. "No," Wade said honestly, and Grace raised her head to look at him in surprise. He smiled and touched her cheek gently. "I think we will be happier. I think we will have hard days and struggles and times when we disagree. But I also think we will face them together, and each challenge we overcome will make us stronger. So yes, I think we will be this happy and more for the rest of our lives." Grace kissed him, pouring all her love and hope into the gesture. "Then I cannot wait to see what comes next." The first year of marriage brought adjustments and challenges, as all first years do. Grace had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, which were very different from keeping house in town. Wade worked long hours during the busy seasons, and there were times when Grace barely saw him from dawn to dusk. But they made time for each other when they could, and the moments they shared were all the sweeter for being hard-won. Grace turned the little house into a real home, adding her own touches bit by bit. She planted a vegetable garden and filled the windows with flowers. She sewed curtains and tablecloths, and made their bedroom a cozy retreat from the demands of the day. And she began to build relationships with the ranch hands and their families, becoming a vital part of the community that supported the Riverside Ranch. Wade, true to his nature, proved to be an excellent foreman. The men respected him because he worked harder than any of them and never asked them to do something he would not do himself. Samuel Richardson increasingly relied on Wade's judgment, and as the year progressed, it became clear that Wade was not just managing the ranch but truly leading it. In the spring of 1884, Samuel officially made Wade a partner, signing over 40% of the ranch in a ceremony witnessed by lawyers from Sacramento. It was a momentous occasion, celebrated with a dinner at the ranch attended by all the hands and their families. Samuel gave a speech about how he had finally found someone worthy of carrying on his life's work, and Wade responded with heartfelt gratitude and promises to honor the trust Samuel had placed in him. That night, alone in their house, Wade and Grace celebrated privately. "We did it," Wade said, pulling Grace into his arms. "We have a real stake in something permanent now. This ranch is partly ours." "You did it," Grace corrected. "You worked so hard for this, Wade. You earned every bit of it. We did it together," Wade insisted. "You have been my partner in every way that matters, Grace. I could not have done this without your support." It was during that conversation that Grace told Wade the news she had been holding close for a few days, waiting for the right moment. "Speaking of partnerships," she said, trying to keep her voice casual, "I think we are about to expand ours. I am fairly certain I am pregnant." Wade went absolutely still. Then a grin split his face, so wide and joyful that Grace could not help but laugh. "Truly, we are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Grace confirmed, and suddenly she was being spun around, Wade laughing and whooping with delight. "When? How are you feeling? Do you need to see the doctor? Should you be standing? Should you sit down?" "Wade, breathe," Grace said, still laughing. "I am fine. I think the baby will come sometime in the late fall. And yes, I will see Dr. Morrison, but there is no rush. Women have been having babies for thousands of years. I think I can manage." But despite her calm reassurances, Wade immediately became devoted to her care. He insisted she not lift anything heavy, that she rest in the afternoons, that she eat plenty of good food. It was simultaneously endearing and somewhat annoying, but Grace tolerated it because she knew it came from love. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace felt well aside from some morning sickness in the early months, and she continued to manage the household and help where she could on the ranch. Uncle Thomas, delighted at the prospect of becoming a great uncle, visited often, bringing supplies and news from town. As summer turned to fall, Grace's belly swelled, and she felt the baby move inside her, a flutter at first and then stronger kicks that made her laugh and place Wade's hand over her stomach so he could feel their child too. "I hope it is a girl," Wade said one evening, his hand spread wide over Grace's belly. "A little girl who looks just like you." "I hope it is healthy," Grace said practically. "Girl or boy, I do not care as long as the baby is strong and well." "That too," Wade agreed. "But I still hope she has your eyes." The baby, as it turned out, was a boy. He arrived on a cold November night after 14 hours of labor that left Grace exhausted but triumphant. Wade, who had paced outside the bedroom for the entire duration, was finally allowed in to meet his son just as the sun was rising. "He is perfect," Wade breathed, looking down at the tiny red-faced bundle in Grace's arms. "You are perfect. How do you feel?" "Tired," Grace admitted, "but happy." "So happy, Wade." They named him William Thomas Ashford after Wade's father and Grace's uncle. Little Will was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs, and he quickly became the center of his parents' world. Wade proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk Will when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and gazing at his son with such obvious adoration that Grace fell in love with him all over again. Uncle Thomas, presented with his namesake, cried unashamedly and immediately began spoiling the baby with gifts and attention. "I never thought I would live to see the day," he said, holding Will carefully. "A new generation of Palmers and Ashfords. Your parents would be so proud of you, Grace." The years that followed were full and rich. The Riverside Ranch prospered under Wade's management, expanding its herds and improving its infrastructure. When Samuel Richardson passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1886, he left Wade the remaining 60% of the ranch, making Wade and Grace the sole owners. It was a responsibility they took seriously, working hard to honor Samuel's legacy while also making the ranch their own. Will grew into a sturdy, adventurous little boy with his father's coloring and his mother's inquisitive nature. He learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, much to Grace's worry and Wade's pride. The little house expanded, with 2 more bedrooms added to accommodate future children and visiting family. In 1887, Grace gave birth to a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, who indeed had her mother's eyes just as Wade had hoped. Sarah was quieter than her boisterous brother, preferring books and flowers to horses and cattle. Grace loved both her children fiercely, marveling at how different they were despite growing up in the same household. Uncle Thomas remained a constant presence in their lives until his death in 1889. He passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, and Grace mourned him deeply, grateful that he had lived to know her children and see her happily settled. She inherited the general store, which she and Wade decided to keep running, hiring a manager to handle the daily operations while using the profits to further invest in the ranch. Through it all, the love between Grace and Wade only deepened. They had their disagreements, as any couple does. There were difficult years when drought threatened the herds, and lean years when prices for cattle dropped. There were times when Grace felt overwhelmed by the demands of running a household and raising children, and times when Wade worked himself nearly to exhaustion trying to keep the ranch profitable. But they faced every challenge together, drawing strength from each other. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch and talk about their days, sharing burdens and joys alike. Wade never forgot to tell Grace how much he loved her, and Grace never stopped being grateful for the day he had stepped between her and danger. In 1892, Grace gave birth to their 3rd child, another boy they named Samuel in honor of the man who had given them their start. Little Samuel was a happy, easy baby who seemed to smile from the moment he was born. With 3 children and a thriving ranch, the Ashford household was full of noise and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of a family building a life together. One evening in the summer of 1895, Grace and Wade sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Will, now 11, was teaching 7-year-old Sarah to rope a fence post, while 3-year-old Samuel toddled after them, determined to keep up with his older siblings. "You ever think about that day?" Grace asked, leaning against Wade's shoulder. "The day we met, all the time," Wade admitted. I think about how close I came to just riding past, to minding my own business. If I had been 5 minutes later, or if I had decided to go to a different store for supplies, we might never have met. Fate brought us together, Grace said. I truly believe that. We were meant to find each other. Then I am grateful to fate, Wade said, kissing the top of her head. Every day I am grateful. Grace turned to look up at him, seeing threads of silver beginning to appear in his hair, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to her, he was just as handsome as the day he had defended her in the street of Yosemite, maybe more so because now she knew the goodness of his heart, the steadiness of his love. I love you, Wade Ashford, she said. More today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow. And I love you, Grace Ashford, Wade replied. You are my heart, my home, and my greatest adventure. They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. In the yard, their children played, oblivious to their parents' romantic moment. The cattle lowed in the distance, settling for the night. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the scent of wildflowers and possibilities. Years later, when their children were grown and starting families of their own, when the Riverside Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the region, Grace and Wade would still sit on that porch in the evenings. They would hold hands and watch the sun set and remember. They would remember the fear and uncertainty of those early days. They would remember the moment Wade had said, "She is under my protection now," and changed both their lives forever. They would remember learning to trust, learning to love, learning to build a life together from scratch. Will grew up to take over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, marrying a sweet girl from Sacramento and giving Grace and Wade their first grandchildren. Sarah surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school in Yosemite and educating children throughout the region. Samuel, the baby, followed his father's footsteps into ranching but on a smaller scale, buying property near the Riverside Ranch and raising horses. Through all of it, Grace and Wade remained the foundation of their growing family. They were the example of what love could be when it was built on respect and trust and genuine partnership. Young couples would look to them and hope their own marriages could be half as strong. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Wade surprised Grace with a gift. It was a leather-bound journal, beautiful and expensive, with her initials embossed on the cover. "I thought you might want to write down our story," Wade said, "for the grandchildren, so they know where they came from. So they know that good things can come from difficult circumstances, and that love is worth fighting for." Grace opened the journal, running her fingers over the smooth blank pages. "Where should I start?" "Start with the truth," Wade said. "Tell them about the day a cowboy stopped a stranger from hitting a young woman and said she was under his protection. Tell them how that act of simple decency turned into the greatest love story either of us could have imagined." So Grace began to write. She wrote about Yosemite in 1883, about Uncle Thomas and the general store, about Silas Drummond and the fear she had felt in that moment before Wade intervened. She wrote about falling in love slowly, about building trust and a home and a family. She wrote about hard times and good times, about the ranch and the children and the life they had created together. And as she wrote, Grace marveled at how much had grown from that single moment of courage. Wade had stepped forward when he could have walked away, had chosen to protect a stranger when it would have been easier to mind his own business. That choice had rippled outward, creating waves that would extend far beyond their own lives. Their children would tell the story to their children, and those children would tell their children in turn. The Riverside Ranch would remain in the Ashford family for generations, a testament to the foundation Wade and Grace had built. And at the heart of it all would be that simple truth. Love changes everything. On a warm evening in late summer 1910, Grace and Wade celebrated their 50th year together. The ranch was full of family. 3 generations gathered to honor the couple whose love had started it all. There were grandchildren running everywhere, playing the same games Will and Sarah and Samuel had played years before. There were toasts and speeches and laughter. But the moment Grace treasured most came late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and she and Wade found themselves alone on the porch again, just as they had been so many times before. Wade's hair was white now, his face deeply lined from decades in the sun. Grace's own hair had gone silver, and her hands were marked with age spots and the evidence of a life spent working hard. But when Wade took her hand and raised it to his lips, Grace felt exactly as she had that day by the river when he had kissed her for the first time. 50 years, Wade said softly. Half a century with the most remarkable woman I have ever known. No regrets, Grace asked, though she already knew the answer. Not a single one, Wade confirmed. Except maybe that I did not meet you sooner, so we could have had even more years together. We have had enough years to fill several lifetimes, Grace said, and we are not done yet. No, Wade agreed, pulling her close. We are not done yet. They sat together as the stars came out, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, and every important moment of their lives together. The ranch was quiet now, the cattle settled, the horses drowsing in their paddocks. In the house behind them, their family slept under the roof Wade and Grace had provided. Grace thought about the young woman she had been, frightened and alone in a rough frontier town. She thought about the cowboy who had stepped forward to protect her, not knowing that he was really saving himself, that he needed her just as much as she needed him. She thought about all the years since, the laughter and tears, the triumphs and struggles, the ordinary, extraordinary magic of building a life with someone you love. Thank you, Grace said softly. For what? Wade asked. For stopping, Grace said. For stepping forward instead of walking past. For protecting me and loving me and choosing me every single day for 50 years. The choice was never hard, Wade said. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were someone special. I knew you were worth protecting, worth knowing, worth loving. I have spent 50 years proving that instinct right. They kissed then, a kiss that held 50 years of love and passion and commitment, and when they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Shall we go inside? Wade asked. It is getting late. In a moment, Grace said. I want to stay here just a little longer, looking at the stars and holding your hand. I want to remember this feeling. What feeling? Complete happiness, Grace said simply. Perfect contentment. The knowledge that I am exactly where I am supposed to be, with exactly who I am supposed to be with. I want to remember that feeling forever. Then we will stay as long as you like, Wade said, and they did. They stayed until the moon rose over the mountains, until the night grew cool and the stars blazed brilliant overhead. They stayed until Grace was ready to go inside, to their home, to their bed, to the life they had built together one day, one choice, one act of love at a time. And when they finally did go inside, hand in hand as always, the ranch settled into peaceful darkness. The cattle slept. The horses dreamed. The house held 3 generations of love within its walls. And Grace and Wade, the foundation of it all, slept peacefully, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Because once upon a time, a cowboy had stopped a stranger from hitting a woman and declared she was under his protection. And from that single act of courage and decency had grown something beautiful and lasting, a love that would endure through all the years ahead, a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. It was, in the end, the greatest story either of them could have hoped to live. And they lived it fully, gratefully, and together until the very end of their days.